welcome to episode 5 of Find Things Well, a podcast celebrating the series Our Flag Means Death in all its magnificent fuckery. I'm Abigail, my pronouns are they, them.
And I'm Elayna, my pronouns are she and they, and today we are going to be discussing Our Flag Means Death, episode 5, The Best Revenge is Dressing Well. I am so excited because this is the episode where we get our show name, so we're finally here.
It is. It's also one of my favorite episodes of the whole show.
Yes.
For a lot of reasons. So
Agreed.
I'm really excited to
a lot
talk
of reasons
about.
we'll dig into.
Today, we'll be kicking things off with What's on Deck, the part of the show where we share the latest news about the series, as well as open the floor to any messages, questions, or shoutouts from our listeners. So we have a couple of comments from listeners that we want to point out today. One of them is from Twitter user Beck, pronouns they, them, handle is @BeckMadeThis. They were responding to a thread that was talking about the scene in this episode where it looks like they're about to kiss and then they kind of back off. And you know, Beck was pointing out the many different interpretations of this, you know, is Steed hesitating and that's Ed's picking up on that, or like Ed's just having some gay panic, which, you know, relatable, or they're both not ready. All of these takes are great, and we are going to talk about this when we get to that point, but we wanted to point out that this person was excited for us to talk about this in our episode, and we are definitely going to. So thank you for your comment.
So our other message that we got from a listener was on Tumblr from Tumblr user Emma, and she basically sent us this lovely message that had a bunch of different like comparisons for characters that are related to like the tying things up segment where we talk about like this moment reminded me of this thing from something else. And as a person who very enjoyed Game of Thrones, one of Emma's comparisons was about Ed and Steed's relationship and how they could see parallels to Jaime and Brienne of Tarth. And I thought that was like a really good comparison, because if you've seen the show, like they both have this dynamic of like respect for one another that like no one else around them seems to have. And I just thought that it was like a really great comment, and I wanted to thank Emma for sending us that because it was so good.
There's no other news from the show itself since the renewal.
We're just riding on that wave of excitement and Pride Month and being happy that we're going to get more of this stuff.
Yeah. So now it's time for Things of Note, where we will dive into our main discussion of episode 5. For starters, we are going to take a look at the description of the episode from HBO and rate it on a 5-star scale. And then based on our ratings, we'll offer a sentence we think could improve said description.
So the description for this episode is: Blackbeard and Steed attend a fancy party. Olawande and Frenchie embrace false identities. Izzy and Lucius go head to head. How, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do we rate this summary for this week?
I'm gonna give it a 3. It gives us a glimpse into all 3 storylines, which I appreciate. Nothing's left out. However, everyone attends the party. Like, or not everyone, but you know, more than just Blackbird and Steed attends the party.
That's
so
true.
it's missing some details that I think it's an okay description. I'm gonna give it a 3.
You know, I think I had a 4 originally, but given your reasons, I think I'm actually going to agree and meet with you on a 3. Because yeah, it does tell you what the 3 through lines of the episode are, but it doesn't really give you much beyond
juicy.
that.
I want it to be juicy.
Yeah, like we've said this before, like we want a zesty description, and this is like if you were reading like the beat sheet of what happens in the episode, as opposed to a description that would entice a viewer to watch.
Exactly. So how would you make it? How would you entice a viewer to watch, Elayna?
Oh, I would probably have a line in there about Blackbeard and Steed stealing glances at one another, because they're just, the gay pining in this episode is off the fucking charts. It is so ridiculous. I would want to make some kind of allusion to that, because I feel like it's just a huge part of this episode is just these like longing, gazing looks that they give each other.
I think I would add a sentence about the how Olawande and Frenchie hoodwink a bunch of racists, because I think that's just delightful.
Brilliant.
And that would
one of my
intrigue
favorite
me.
things about this episode, and I had it in the notes to talk about later, but I'll mention it now because it's relevant. Just the line, this pyramid scheme stands to make us fabulously wealthy. I think is probably the one line that the first time through I just all out cackled because I couldn't get over how brilliant of a line that was, because it's like, you see what they're doing leading up to it, and you know that they're like, trying to scheme these people, but when he said pyramid scheme and you realize the double entendre going on there, I was like, oh, these writers are
It's
next fucking level.
it's honestly, it's so good. So that actually leads us really nicely into our MVP picks of the week,
Yes.
because this is going to factor pretty heavily for both of us. I couldn't control myself. I have three names that I wrote down,
Of
and
course.
yeah, because I can't make choices. I think Frenchie's my like ultimate pick for this episode. I think that everything that he does in this episode just propels the story forward. He is the one that comes up with these plans. He's the one that gets them to the party. He's the one that
Gets them
ensures
out
that
of it.
yes, he gets them out of it. But I also want to give an honorable mention to Abshir, who feeds them the crucial information, very subtle.
Mhm.
And also to Olawande, who ultimately goes, you know where this money would best be served? In the hands of the people who deserve it.
Yeah.
Let's let them go and hoodwink more people. It's gorgeously crafted, but Frenchie MVP of my heart in this episode.
Mm-hmm. In case it weren't obvious, Frenchie was also my pick. I like to think about when I come to this question of like who is the MVP, I tend to frame it in my head and like whose fault is this episode? And like I feel like Frenchie, this episode is Frenchie's fault in all the best ways, because he's the one that finds the note, he's the one that gets them there, and is the one that just surprises you the most, because up to this point you've got a lot of like mentions of Frenchie just kind of like being sort of aloof and weird, and he makes like the whole comment about crystals in women's bodies and propelling demons, and so to see that he can be this like savvy and smart and conniving in a way that like benefits him and his friends, and like the viceroy line, perfection.
His ability to think on his feet and come up with the most brilliant plan is great, and he's funny.
I'd also like there to be an honorable mention for the line "their dicks about spoons," because I just think that was a great line. Most valuable pirate this week just handedly goes to Frenchie.
Well deserved.
So let's dig in, because this is just this episode. We've been talking about this several weeks going now, just like how excited we were for this one, because it's both of us, this is a favorite.
Yeah.
So I don't even know where to start, because I feel like there's just so many good things in this episode.
Yeah, I have some like funny things that I think we should talk about, and then I also have like a couple of serious things.
Let's go for the funny things.
Let's go
dive
for the
into
funny
those.
things.
Let's talk about the one moment that is so discussed on social media. The classic, the iconic "ooh daddy." I have seen that phrase on Twitter way more than I ever should have seen that phrase be on Twitter prior to watching this show.
It's very funny.
Like,
Also,
I just don't understand what Izzy was trying to accomplish.
Like, no, Izzy is just this character that is so repressed is the wrong word. He's so aggressive in everything that he does, but he's also so like held back in everything that he does, and it's like what makes him so interesting, because he's clearly like got all of this stuff going on below the surface, but he's also just kind of being an asshole to everyone.
Yeah. He's like the one character that I think could be classified as being in the closet.
Yes.
He doesn't like, everyone obviously knows that he's gay for Blackbeard, but he doesn't know it. And that's
this is the thing.
Interesting dynamic.
The thing is, he doesn't know it, and so that makes a line like "ooh, daddy," just like where was this coming from? Where was this coming from, hun? Also, the "you think you're cute," that whole exchange is one of my favorites in the whole show. Just
Actually, I think I'm just so.
But I've decided to carry myself like I'm cute. Honestly, pieces of life advice.
Yes.
From Lucian, like,
yeah,
so good.
He's always here to make us feel seen and validated.
The confidence oozing off of him in this episode.
Oh, and when like Pete says the whole like that was really hot. Like, yeah, it was. You're absolutely right, Pete. Yes, it was. And I am so proud of him for that moment because
Confidence is the most
his
sexy thing.
sassiness there is just so good. And that actually was one line I really wanted to mention that I feel like it slides under the radar as this beautiful line that like describes the show, but like you'd blink and you'd miss it. It's the line when Izzy's like in his face and he's like Izzy's threatening to like tell Pete about him sketching Fang, and he just goes, "We don't own each other."
Yes. Yeah. I literally have that line in my notes as
Oh,
well.
I just thought
Yeah.
it's
Like,
great.
see, we don't own each other. Like,
Yeah.
it's such a nice representation of like, yeah, like you said, I think what the show is doing in terms of its queer rep is that
Mhm.
it's humanizing all of these people. It's giving
Yeah.
their experiences like value and meaning, but it's also not reducing any of these characters to their sexuality or their gender or who they're sleeping with or who they're interested in. Like these
Yeah.
characters are allowed to be themselves and ultimately in charge of their own lives. And then that means when they relate to each other, they relate to each other as like free people who
Yeah.
don't own each other, who do genuinely like who have like communication skills
Yeah.
and like
And it's
honesty in their relationships. And that's like rare and hard to find and hard to cultivate. And yes, they're portrayed as like kind of not very smart pirates, but they're very emotionally smart.
yeah. And I feel like that a lot of that is because of like Steed's leadership, you know? Because one thing that I didn't even have this in my notes, but it's worth noting was just the fact that there's kind of like even though Steed's not really like on the ship at the time, like Lucius isn't going to do stuff unless his captain tells him to. And there was something that was really nice about that when I was thinking about it because it's like Steed actually pays them. Like they actually they do this for a living. Like and they're being treated with respect and that they deserve to be paid for what they're for keeping this ship afloat literally. And I think that that's a really cool just the dynamic that they have and like you said it's a big found family energy kind of moment and I just really really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the idea that we don't own each other but we do choose each other is
Oh
very strong, and I think that's what why it's so lovely to see. Also kind of back to the point you just made about them getting paid, like I think back to the first episode when there's all this talk of mutiny.
mhm.
It's interesting to see how they've progressed to this point,
Yeah.
where this point there is a stability to this
Mm,
crew, and in terms of their loyalty to Steed and to each other,
yeah.
that is has superseded like their
Yeah, I think that
concerns.
Steed has very much in managing to get Blackbeard aboard their ship. I think that he's managed to earn their respect in a really big way. Even though they still view him as kind of this like bumbling sort of weirdo, like they also have this level of respect for him,
Mhm.
which is just really really nice. Oh, one thing I wanted to talk about while we're on the subject of Steed, there's the moment where they're at the party and everybody is kind of paying attention to Ed because he's, doing his whole Jeff the accountant thing, which also just Jeff the accountant. What a wonderful name and occupation to choose and the whole bit of
Whenever
like being an accountant sounds fancy as fuck.
whenever people complain about the historical accuracy of this show, I just want to point out things like Jeff the accountant
Yeah.
and pyramid scheme as a line because
Yeah, there's just like there's no I think that all of the historical like accuracy went out the window when we saw that Olu was wearing Crocs like at that point. But wanted to mention that scene where he's telling all these Jeff the accountant stories and Steed kind of in this one moment tries to like take the attention back and he's like I too have traveled. And the first time I watched that I remember thinking differently of Steed. I remember thinking like, oh, why does he want to be the center of attention? Like, why is he trying to do this? But from many multiple watch throughs and also just like reading up on other fan theories and things on Twitter and Tumblr, I've come to have a real respect for Steed in that moment because it comes off more as he knows how fickle these people are and he doesn't want to have to see Ed go through that moment in which they turn on him. And so he's trying to take that attention back, not because he wants it himself, because clearly he doesn't want to deal with these aristocrats. He fucking left this life for a reason, but he sees how much it's meaning to Ed that all these people are paying him this attention, and that he's, this, like, this center of what everybody's talking about, and he doesn't want to have Ed go through that experience. And I just thought that was like a really nice, like, development in how I view the scene, and I'm really curious what your take on that was.
I really like that, because I think my initial reaction was similar to yours, where I was a little bit like, why is Steed trying to pull this attention? Like, this is clearly really meaningful for Ed. Why is he trying to pull the attention back to himself? Is this a sense of him feeling insecure? Like, I think insecurity was the piece that I pulled off of, thought I was getting from Steed. But I like this interpretation. I like this interpretation more, because even if it is also a little bit of insecurity from Steed, it's also a like keen knowledge of this world. And I think that interpretation works with the rest of the episode, because what we see play out is exactly that, is like, as soon as Ed makes a misstep, they turn on him. As soon as it's easier for all the rich people to laugh at him, as soon as there's as soon as that's more fun for them to laugh at him than with him, they immediately turn and start laughing at him. And Steed like understands that, and he's not affected by it the same way, but he does have the tools to deal with it. And so I think what I appreciate is, even though Ed kind of like steamrolls the conversation when he's getting, the good attention from these people, Steed doesn't that doesn't affect the way that Steed immediately steps in to support him once the tables have turned. Like, once Ed comes out and is like, they're being really mean, they're being really aggressive, and Steed's immediate response is to be like, okay, we're gonna fix it. He's like, I know these people, I know how to handle this, I'm not concerned. And he doesn't have any of that insecurity that may have been there earlier is gone.
And the
so
way that he says stand down to Ed, and the fact that Ed listens to him, like, this is not a person who is used to taking direction from any fucking body. He's Blackbeard, he does what he wants, he says what he wants, he's his own person. And so for him to react so immediately and earnestly to Steed being like, you're in over your head, like, I think was a really nice moment for their dynamic. And it felt like one of the first times where like Ed was really looking to Steed to help him through something. And I think that that's a really, this episode very much is a turning point episode, not only because it's halfway through, but the writers really knew what they were doing in terms of, they've showed you this evolution. Like, we know all the characters now, we know all their personalities, we know what they're doing. Now it's about strengthening the relationships. And we see a lot of that happening in this episode, and that interaction particularly.
Yeah, and it's a flip from some of the earlier episodes. We've gotten a lot of episodes focusing on Ed teaching Steed things, and Ed addressing Steed's insecurity about being a pirate. Whereas now
and
we're
even
getting
before Ed arrives, like, the crew is doing that to him. The crew is pointing out how wrong he does stuff.
And now Steed gets to, for once, be the one that knows how to diffuse a situation in the most effective way. And I think it's really nice, again, that we're seeing different kinds of like intelligence and different kinds of skills and knowledge be respected and not be the butt of the joke. Like, I think one of the things before I had seen much more of the show, in the first episode, in those first couple of scenes, my biggest worry with Steed's character was that he was just going to constantly be the butt of the joke. And I don't enjoy media that takes a character and is like, we're just going to continually, where the narrative, where not only the characters but the narrative itself is set up to make that character constantly look ridiculous, constantly look like they are off on the wrong foot, regardless of how smart they actually are. I think of characters like Jerry from Parks and Rec, where you like, I don't find the jokes at his expense funny, and I love that show, but I don't find those jokes funny because I'm like, there is this narrative push that dehumanizes this character and turns them into only this joke. And that was my biggest worry with Steed in the first episode, when they make a lot of jokes at the expense of his skill as a pirate. But I think what the show was doing was actually just setting us up for this sort of, for like the real scenario where sometimes you look at someone and you think they're one thing,
Yeah,
or you make a bunch of assumptions about them and their skills, and then when you actually get to know them, you see that they are so much more than that. And the show has let us do that as watchers alongside the characters doing that. And this
exactly.
is a big, like you said, a big turning point where we like fully see Steed come into his own. Steed is confident, and we see that in his last interaction with Ed on the boat.
Mm,
He is the one that's able to address a core childhood insecurity of Ed's in the
yeah.
kindest, gentlest of ways.
Yeah, we have, and we gotta, this is a perfect way to talk about the moon episode or the moon segment because it just is not only like we picked it as the name for a very specific reason because it just, it's a moment where Steed is getting to acknowledge Ed in this light that Ed has never allowed himself to see him in. And the one thing that I had that I wanted to specifically mention is the piece of silk really feels like this sort of totem for him. It's like this very, it's like a sacred object to him.
It is
And
definitely.
and I think it was really beautiful, the like expression. This comes down to like Taika and Reese's acting. When he hands it to him, there is this there is this trust laced with skepticism. It's like he trusts him and he wants to trust him and that's why he lets him take it, but there's also I think this little bit of fear there because nobody, I don't believe, like this is a headcanon that I will hold till the day I die. No one in his life besides himself and his mother has ever touched that piece of silk
Mhm.
until Steed.
Yeah.
And for Steed to not only take a look at it and compliment it, but then give it back to him in a way that makes him realize that he can he can be this person that he always wanted to be. Like you
Mhm.
see through the flashbacks that like Ed hates the fact that he grew up poor and then he grew up being marginalized in all these different ways, and it's just so gorgeous to see this moment of validation come from somebody that he's come to care so deeply about.
Mhm. It's vulnerability. Like when you were describing that tension for Ed of both like trust, but also fear, and also like uncertainty. Like that's vulnerability. Like that's what
Yeah, that's
real
a perfect
vulnerability
word to
is.
describe it.
It's when you put yourself in a situation where you're like, yes, I trust this person, but I am going to open up something of myself that I don't open up to everyone, that I open up with the opportunity that you could use that to hurt me. And I'm and by the very nature of opening up, I am like going to experience the like anxiety and pain and fear of opening up. But he
Yeah.
trusts Steed to, and Steed treats that vulnerability with the utmost care. And not only like does he not hurt Ed with it, he goes, he like sees what Ed needs to hear, and he goes, you belong with this thing. You wear fine things well. This is not outside of who you are. Like this is a part of you. You are deserving of fine things and they suit you. And like that is just him seeing, that's him seeing beyond the surface level
Yeah.
of everything that's happened in this episode to like the core of what Ed really needed to hear, and what he couldn't have like possibly asked to hear. And
Yeah.
it gives, I have so much respect for Steed in this episode, and just the way
Yes.
he shows his care in a way that's not patronizing,
Mm-mm.
or you know it's very
He
it's
keeps
very
checking
stern.
in with Ed throughout the
Yeah.
episode, even because even before they get the invitation, he comes up, and this is a good moment to talk about the whole exchange with that French officer where he calls him a donkey, which I have to be give full disclosure here. I did not know that that particular word is apparently like a racial slur in New Zealand that's used against Indigenous people. And so I didn't really notice that until I saw someone, it was like a thread by an Indigenous person who was mentioning like the significance of that sequence and how Ed reacts to being called that. And just so you've got Ed in this scenario where he's being called something very demeaning, very cruel. He's being compared to an animal, and yet he wants to be this person who has fine things, who experiences the pageantry and the niceness of this world that he's never been allowed to be a part of. And you even see it in the moment when he like agrees, when he's like, we're gonna go to this party, because it's Steed is just standing there. And I think the line that he says, he's like, oh yeah, you know, with all of these people being fancy and the fashion. And the minute he says the fashion, and it's just like, we're going. He's you can tell he's so excited because this is a part of
Yeah.
himself he's never been allowed to explore. And I just
And
love that for him.
Steed allows him to do that, like not because Steed gives him permission, but because Steed as a person is who he is confidently.
Yeah.
In greater confidence. Steed is working through those own insecurities, but like it makes me think of the fact that as just in general, like when you're fully yourself, the people around you get the opportunity to be fully themselves, and they get the opportunity to like lean into places where they're scared or where they might be vulnerable, or where they like I think about that with my closest friends and the people that I love. The more they are them, the more I can be me, and the more I am me, the more I give them opportunity to risk being real. And I think we see that in the way these two interact with each other. Like that's where I think that like love for each other that's starting to bloom and grow at this point in the show. And I do think calling it that is accurate. Like we're starting to see their love for each other, regardless of how they would define it at this point as romantic or whatever. Like they're maybe not at the point where they're defining it as that, but they are caring for each other with the kind of like love that does have a huge impact on each other.
This whole section of conversation is like, I literally am sitting here trying not to cry because it's just really good.
I mean, I think why I was excited to talk about this episode is because I knew we were going to be able to get into like this really meaningful conversation. Like we've had a lot of fun in the last few episodes, and we've talked about meaningful things as well. But I think like this episode for me that like turned in and went, oh, where I go at, oh, this show like is saying something really meaningful about love and family and choosing people and what it means to care for each other deeply and profoundly. And I like that was I've been so excited to talk about it because of that. Like I think there's a lot of profound things that they're doing in this.
Yeah, this is the episode that really deepens the show, I think, because and again, that's not to say that there aren't deep moments that happen in the first 4 episodes, but the first 4 episodes are so much about your setup that like by the time you get to, you know, episodes kind of like I would say like 4 through 6, you know, maybe 4 through 7 are really where everything starts to get a lot deeper for each of the characters. And it's just that I love that middle act, and it's so hard to get a middle act right. I will say that, like I say that as a writer, as a person that observes stories. Like they literally in film school when we were working on a screenplay, they called it the murky middle because it's hard to navigate because it's the part of the story where you're really saying what it is that you want to say. There was this other term, and I apologize that I can't remember who to attribute this quote to, but it's like a quote that's talking about like good storytelling and like a way in which you can approach it. And it said that every story should follow like 3 things. It should tell you what it's going to tell you, it should tell you, and then it should tell you what it just told you. And that's like the completion of a story. And I feel like this show follows that story arc to a T. It's so good at doing that. And this middle episode is really where it all just like coalesces into this beautiful, fun, rich episode. And I'm so like, this is the kind of stuff that made me want to start a podcast about this, because
I mean, this is why we make this is why we like talk about media, because like this is what shapes us as people. Like this is the opportunity to see something on the screen that we want reflected in our own lives.
Yeah. And the way in which this show particularly, like I wouldn't classify myself as middle-aged, but I'm also not like, you know, in my 20s anymore. Like I'm in this weird temporal space right now.
You're in
where,
the middle part of your story.
Yeah. And I'm in the middle. And so for me, and I've seen this as like a lot of people have said this, folks in their like late 20s through 40s are really resonating with this show, because
Yeah.
there is not a lot of media that is like portraying that phase of life with
Yes.
as much nuance as this show is doing, and also with as much fun as this show is doing. Because the fact that like we're sitting here having this really deep vulnerable conversation about the show, but you've also got things like, you can finger my dents anytime, like what the fuck.
Oh,
The
when
show
I
is
tell you that,
bizarre.
like, I was on the floor, like, the first time I watched this, I was watching it with friends. The first time I watched it, when we get to the scene where with the drawing, and you hear all the comments, and they like are leading, and they flip the drawing around, and you see the drawing. I was on the floor, killing myself laughing.
Yep.
Like,
And you're just, that's a moment in which Izzy is the audience stand-in. What the fuck?
and I was in the room with multiple with people who were watching with me, and we all had the same reaction. And it was very enjoyable. And it, like, I think, yeah, like you said, like, this show is able to do the really meaningful stuff, but it's also still able to have fun. And it doesn't
Yeah.
reduce its older characters or its middle-aged characters to, to just like, oh, they're in the boring middle part of their life. Like, I think of so many shows where, once we get past coming of age,
You just get like either you get like these one note sort of midlife crisis stories that
yeah,
don't really go very deep into anybody.
or bored people living through their lives, or like
Yeah.
like there's no seems to be no middle of like people experiencing their lives but not necessarily having a crisis, or maybe they're
Yeah.
having a crisis but they're not like blowing up their entire life because of a crisis. They're like just trying to figure out what's going to happen, and like, not to say that blowing up your life as
Is
a
the best
midlife
course of
crisis is
action.
necessarily, or the worst course of action,
Yeah.
depending. But just to say, it's nice to see a show that doesn't rely on just these tropes for characters of its age.
Yeah, it has this very nice balance to it where you have, this vulnerable moment where Ed is getting really upset because somebody is calling him a slur. And then 3 seconds later, you've got, don't debase yourself for a man who hasn't a single tureen on board. Like, just the way that you can have these like little funny moments tucked into the seriousness is just so nice.
It's really refreshing. And I think, like you said, it's resonating with people like our age and a little older than us really strongly for that. I think those reasons.
Yeah.
I have one more comment I want to make.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a turn, but is kind of related to this. At the very beginning of the episode, they're having the conversation, and I believe it's Lucius who says, "We're also real pirate." Oh yeah,
Oh,
it's
it's Black Pete.
yeah, Black Pete. Yeah, they're talking about it's
We're also real
Izzy.
pirates in the
Yeah,
real
Izzy,
world.
Izzy, Izzy is like coming down on them and being like, you know, you got to work. I'm in charge. I'm going to tell you what to do. Just like it's
Hmm.
there's a lot of him being like, you got to be real pirates. And Black Pete's like, we are also real pirates in the real world. And
Hmm.
it stood out to me because, again, connected to other things we've kind of said in other episodes and earlier today, like, just because you see the world differently, just because these pirates
Mm.
get paid and go to fancy parties sometimes and kind of have a different way of pirating, like, just because you see the world differently doesn't mean what you see isn't real or that your approach is any less valuable. And I think about, like, I think queer people in general
Yeah.
sometimes get told, oh, you have to grow up when you grow up and get a real relationship, when you stop, XYZ thing, when
Well,
you like,
yeah, to like get really personal with it. Like I'm kind of going through that at the moment in regards to like my work life, because I'm trying very hard at the moment to make freelancing something that is a sustainable thing for me. And I will be honest, I'm struggling through it. It's really difficult to work gig to gig as opposed to having what everybody keeps telling me I should have, which is a 9 to 5 or some, retail job with a boss and a manager that's very typical. And I did that for years, and I can tell you that I left that more miserable than I've ever been in my life. And this era that I'm in now of trying to figure out how to do things differently and for myself has been, even though it's like a financial struggle a lot of the time, it has been rewarding for my fucking soul to just be able to come into my own and decide how I want to live my life, even if it's not how I see other people are living their lives. And I think that that is a beautiful point that you bring up.
And that's real adulthood. Like you said, like that's what you're doing. What you're doing is real adulthood. What you're
Yeah,
doing is real life, just as much as anyone else your age, because
mhm,
you are a real person and it is your life. And
exactly.
I think about that in terms of like, I also make this connection in terms of fandom, because like you and I are both people who are past the socially acceptable age for
Of
fans.
being able to like be fangirly about
Yeah,
shit.
to be loud fangirly about shit is something that is generally socially acceptable when you are a teenager and maybe when you're in your very early 20s, but even then it starts to get
Mhm.
dicey, and you and I are both well past that. And I think one of the things in my own life in the past, really in the past year since beginning podcasting, has been reclaiming that part of myself and being like, no, I can be an adult and be really active in fan spaces. That's something that's really important to me. I've maybe said this rant before, so if I have,
Oh no,
you get
this
to
is
hear it again on this podcast. Maybe I've said it. I think I've probably said it on queering things before. But just like I think what this quote reminded me of is that we are also real adults in the real world. We are real
yes.
pirates in the real world. We are real fans in the real world, and that is something to be that we can own and that we can see as we may see the world differently because of our experiences, but it doesn't mean that what we're seeing is less real or less valuable. And, you know, as queer people as well, who often experience adolescence very differently, who often experience sometimes the milestones
Yep.
of our adult lives differently. Like, I mean, I came out only about a year ago. You know,
Mhm.
some of the things that a lot of people have done in their teen years, I'm doing in my late 20s. And
Yeah.
that's such a cute, common experience of queer people. So I also liked this line in that context, because this show is so much about queer people. Like,
Yeah.
our experiences are real and they're important. And I like that this show is honoring that. So that's my feeling. I have a lot of feelings about this episode, clearly.
That's absolutely beautiful. I'm gonna be honest, I had several other points I wanted to talk about, but that feels like such a good point to end the conversation.
Sorry. If you
Oh
want to talk about something else, you can, but I also
no,
feel like we've done
that
enough.
really was so good. Let me look at my notes because I feel like there was one or two other things I wanted to mention. Um, Antoinette and Gabrielle's voice, they're the lines I say like
So
all the
funny.
time because they're just so funny. Like whenever I hear somebody talking a lot now in my brain, I'm just like, you're insistent nettering. Like I just
They're so honestly, that cameo, those two, I like saw them come on screen and I was like, they didn't get them.
you've got to
Oh
be
my
kidding.
god, you got them. They are going to be so funny. And then they like delivered and they were so funny. Every time I was like, I can't see you as anyone else but your real life personality and like every other role you've done.
Yeah, I was
Like,
like,
you
Nick
seem
Kroll,
like a
what are you doing in
transplant.
the 1700s?
Exactly. I was like, I cannot see you as an actual character on this show. You were
Well,
just a persona, but you're so funny.
I
But I
felt
don't
that
care.
too. I felt that a little bit about like Spanish Jackie and Fred Armisen when they were both
Yeah,
in it.
it
Like
did.
the
Yeah,
cameos in this show are absolutely ape shit. And I don't know how
yeah.
they got these people to agree to this. I like
They're all
I'm
playing the most
actually
unhinged characters as well.
yeah, like they're playing these like side characters that are just absolutely bonkers. And like the guy who plays the badmintons, like, oh my God, he is so funny in how he delivers his lines. That man's comedic timing is made of pure solid fucking gold. Um and that also, oh, that was one continuity error I wanted to point out actually. Just the fact that he shows them like the flag and it's like covered in blood or whatever, but we see that flag hoisted on the mast at the end of episode
I
1.
also had that feeling where I was like, I don't, how did they get the flag? And then I sort of like dismissed it.
Yeah.
But I also had that thought of, I feel like when did they get the
Yeah.
flag? Okay.
So that was just one little plot hole. It's the only plot hole that I've noticed so far that I was just like,
pretty
that's
good,
funny.
honestly.
Yeah. But yeah, that is.
I was looking at your how does one win this interaction as a neurodivergent person, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Listen, it had that moment had big autistic energy,
Yeah.
and I appreciated its inclusion very, very much.
The amount of times that I've gone into an interaction and been like, how do I
win?
How do I win? And I'm like, it's not that I want to win. It's just that I want to win. And I don't know how to express the difference there. But it's relatable.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I think we can. That one's just a really side note. Sometimes a quick death is the best way to end a bad conversation. And I was like, these writers, what is in your water? Like, what?
Such good writing in this episode, honestly. There's so many funny, like, just comedic timing in the show in general is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. This will be my last note for the main discussion. One other moment, because we've kind of talked about this on past episodes, in terms of like the fat representation and how great it is. And I just have to highlight my boy Lucius in his whole line about where did it go? When Fang is saying, I've never had anyone take interest in my form before. And then he just says, then you've never met anyone worth a damn. Perfection. Yeah. That line made me feel so goddamn seen. I cannot quantify it and put it into words. And so I had to, even though it's like it's played as this very like fun sort of silly comment in a scene that, as we mentioned, is an absolutely absurd scene. Like the casual way in which John walks in, and it's like, you really captured something there. Like it's so...
and you just think, and you're just led to believe it's one thing, and then it's not. And it's
and it just is really great, and that whole sequence is so funny. But that's what I mean. We were just saying about how this show balances its vulnerability with its comedy is so good, because that was a moment that it was like Lucius was kind of like breaking the fourth wall a little bit and telling any fat person that's ever watched the show, like, if you have someone that doesn't take interest in you, you've never met anyone worth a damn, because you are valid and you deserve to be seen. And so it's just this nice little moment that's tucked into a scene of absolute fucking nonsense, and I loved it.
And again, like, proving the point that you can be funny without it being at someone's expense. Like, even in this scene, you can draw attention to insecurity without making it a punchline. Like, you can make this something that is incredibly like that makes people feel incredibly seen, while also being like a fucking hilarious scene that I like regularly come back to because it's so funny.
Yeah, just everybody's energy in that scene is hilarious, and just the fact that like Izzy's the person that doesn't get it, like, just kind of reminds you that like Izzy is supposed to be this character who, I think he's kind of a foil for how comfortable everyone else is in their skin. Izzy, you can tell that man has trauma to deal with. He is uncomfortable with who he is. He doesn't know who he is outside of his relationship to being Blackbeard's first mate. And I think that it's really going to be interesting to see what they do with him, especially in season 2, because he's a stand-in for a lot of repression, I think. And it's going to be interesting to see that explored more.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's our reminder that like not everything or everyone is at the same place in terms of where they're growing and where they're vulnerable and where they've dealt with their trauma and their repression. Like, he's a constant reminder on the ship that like not everything is all hunky-dory between everyone. And but they managed to still do that in a way that still makes the ship a safe place for the crew, and still makes the showing, like the watching of this crew, a safe, like even when Izzy is being kind of an asshole, it doesn't make me as the viewer feel icky.
Yeah, because you're surrounded by because he's the antagonist. He is the character that is showing you that you don't have to be like this. You don't have to be repressed and stuffy, and you don't have
And
to,
sad and alone.
yeah, like you don't have to be all of these things. Like you can be a richer person. You can allow your being to be more than one note. And I
Yeah,
think that that's really powerful.
agreed.
This has been, I'm going to be honest and just say it, listeners, this has been my favorite main discussion so far. It's been
Yeah, me
wonderful.
too. Me too.
I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that I think about wraps us up for that.
Since that's all we have for our main discussion, it is time to tie things up. The part of the show where we use the noted Tumblr format of same character, different font to relate our favorite characters from Our Flag Means Death to ones from other beloved pieces of media. So, Elayna, what connection do you have this week?
I admit that mine is again a more subtle one. I don't know why these like last two episodes I've been having like trouble thinking of one. But one scene that really just had like same energy for me was the way that Ed behaves in the sequence where he's trying to like impress all these people. It very much reminded me of the 10th Doctor in the episode The Girl in the Fireplace, where he's showing like he shows up to this party, and like for those of you who don't know much about Doctor Who, it's about a time traveler. And so he shows up in his like 20th 21st century suit and tie and jacket and wearing sunglasses, and like he's got a tie on his head, and he shows up and he's like, I think I just accidentally invented the banana daiquiri a few centuries early. And it's just this goofy moment, and it to me had the same energy with like Ed just letting loose and being a weirdo in front of these people and saying things like, I know I mentioned it already, but the fingering my dents line is just the funniest fucking thing. And so that's my comparison for this week. I'm really curious about yours though, because you seem really passionate about this one.
Yeah, I think I took psychic damage when you said people might not know about Doctor Who. And I realized that not all of our listeners maybe were fans in the 2010s of on Tumblr. No shame for any of you, but I feel like I took psychic damage when you mentioned that.
I said, as I was saying it, I was like, I don't know who I'm addressing this to, but I hope that whoever does hear it and doesn't know what I'm talking about will take this as a note to go watch Doctor Who, because it's the best thing ever. And Abigail's going to be starting a podcast about that soon. And so just everybody go get excited about Doctor Who so we can hype that up when it comes out.
Yes, thank you for that little plug. So yeah, my connection this week is from one of my favorite ever shows, and it's a connection between Ed and Abed in Community.
Nice.
So Abed is this character that often that really loves stories and really loves media and really loves characters, and one of the things that he does kind of consistently throughout the show is he'll try on different accents and personas in sort of a role-playing situation, sort of a like personality, like he in a very much a scripting sort of thing when he's trying to figure out how he should interact in a scene. Abed is an autistic character, and so that's like a lot of how he understands the world is through TV shows and stories. And I'm thinking particularly of a scene where he's trying to figure out how to talk to someone, talk to this girl. And so his friends are like, try a character. And he impersonates Don Draper, and then he impersonates Jeff, one of the other characters in Community. And it just had such reminders to me, like Ed's sort of like copying of Steed's mannerisms, copying of his language, his like trying to awkwardly portray something that's very, very opposite of the way he normally is just sort of super
charming. Got the little bows in his beard and the flower in his hair, like sweet child.
It's so nice. It's so funny, but it's also just so wholesome. And again, such a good example of like making something really fun and funny, and you can laugh at the character, but you're also not laughing at the character. You're like,
you're laughing with them.
You're laughing with them because you're like, this is amusing. So yes, and also for any of you who haven't seen Community, highly recommend.
So that is all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to us on your preferred podcasting platform and leave us a rating or review. And you can also remember, please send us voicemails through Anchor because we can play those on the show and share your wonderful theories with everybody else.
Yes, please. We've loved hearing from all of you. Thank you so much for listening to our show. We're really, really grateful that so many of you are enjoying taking to the seas with us for this little adventure.
It's been a joy.
Yeah. If you want more of our queer pirate discourse in your life, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where we are at Find Things Show. If you would like to send us a message, you can also reach out to us on our website, findthingswellshow.tumblr.com. Join us again next time as we discuss episode 6, The Art of Fuckery. I'm Abigail.
And I'm Elayna, and thanks for sailing along with us while we talk it through
as a crew.